Welcome to Better Golf with Kevin and Jake Haime. Golfers, it's our 13th. I'm Kevin Haime. Jake Haime with me.
I'm Jake Haime.
Our 13th episode. Good stuff.
Yeah, we're getting up there. We're starting to find the stride, I think, a little bit.
I agree with that. It's a difficult thing to just turn mics on. And we've been doing, I've been 25 years in radio. The podcast feels a little different because you're not talking to a live audience. And as much as you've guessed it on my show, there's still a finding of a rhythm of a conversation, right? And moods and tempo and allowing both people to speak the right amount and the whole thing. It's intriguing to me to develop the whole process. But I think we're doing well.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, the little experiment of us trying to do this, and I'm really enjoying doing it, so let's keep it going.
Yeah, it has been fun. But in the end, Jake, what we want to do is teach.
For sure.
Better golf with us means exactly that. And there's so many. I think my success on the radio has been very similar in that you've got to remember that people just want to get the ball in the hole, right? And all golfers do. And there's so many reporters out there. I always laugh. Some of the young reporters are even talking like experts. They're analyzing swing changes of players, and they're a bunch of reporters. They're shooting 90, half of them, and they're commenting on changes he's making to his, to bottom out his swing. So I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to listen to golf pros who have competed and played and learned it and then taught for decades and club fitting and doing all that stuff and getting that input. That's what I'd want to listen to anyway, so hopefully I'm right.
But it's also our primary skill, right? When you're a reporter or an analyst doing stuff like that, your primary job is entertainment and reporting and analyzing. And you get, they're probably being fed a lot of the lines.
You ever show your age there saying entertainment first for a reporter?
Yeah, fair enough. Although, that's actually a very good point.
Isn't that something? It's considered to, I think, the XYZ millennial generation that it is to a certain degree a little bit of entertainment.
Well, especially when we're talking
sports
golf.
Reporting.
That's what I'm getting at, right? Especially when we're talking about golf. So, I'm sure they're being given good information of what the guy's doing, and they have sources that are giving them good information, but it's not what they do first, right? It's what we do first. Golf swing is our thing.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk I think the biggest, most important topic for people who are learning to play the game, and that's body coil and body motion. I remember back in 1992, I read David Ledbetter's The Golf Swing, and that was a big book for the golf industry, period. But one of the things he said is the dog wags the tail, and everyone's watching the tail kind of thing, in my opinion, in golf, right? So if you get the body moving properly, all your Flight Scope TrackMan numbers take care of themselves to a certain degree, and showing someone where the path of the arms is not near as difficult as getting them to work their body properly.
Yeah, to be
a lot
fair,
of moving parts.
Yeah, and face control is important, making sure you know where your club face is and having it at the right spot at impact. That's not downplaying that, but I completely agree with you that the easiest way to be able to work your arms the way you need to keep the face in control is to work your body the right way.
Yeah.
Because 90% of what especially earlier stage golfers do is the mistakes they make in their body movement cause compensations with the arms and the club that mean that they can't get the club on the ball properly no matter what they do.
Yeah.
So as much as I agree, all that really matters is that moment of impact, and if you can get the club at the right spot at that point, you're good. Both your potential and your consistency go up when you're getting there the right way and your body's allowing you to do it.
Yeah, we'll get to it a little later. We're going to talk a little bit of general world of golf stuff first, as we always do. But, I would say this, that the body, the body is the real secret to the action and the distance. When you look at a beginner or even just a 90 shooter, they're trying to make everything bigger, but they're hitting it 60 yards less far than I am. Let's say I'm hitting it 285 in the air and they're hitting it 225 or 2 whatever, 50 yards, whatever. But, they've got the same length of arms, the same size of swing. They've got the same golf club. So what's the difference? The difference is in making the body work properly to add that dimension of speed and power to the motion. So everyone wants their arm swing to be bigger, but your arm swing's already bigger than mine, sir, and I'm hitting it 60 yards past you. And everyone, is out there buying $700 drivers, but you've got the exact same driver I've got. I've just got a little stiffer shaft in it. So how come I'm hitting it 60 yards farther than you? Your arms are longer than mine, your swing's longer than mine, your club's the same as mine. And the answer is hidden in using your muscles properly of the body. And it's really the foundation of our golf school here to a certain degree, Jake. I think that we talk about athletic motion and balance and proper movement and using every muscle in your body, but the big muscles to really kind of stabilize, give you rhythm, but add tremendous power to your golf swing. You're a great example. You're swinging over 120 miles an hour with a driver, which is wicked fast. And you're 5'9", and you're not that flexible. You're not turning your shoulders 120 degrees. So where's that power coming from? And anyway, we'll talk about that later in the show.
My doctor says I'm 5'10", by the way.
Well,
not to undersell me.
Okay. Well, maybe I am too then.
No, but I completely agree with you that it's so important and it's so undervalued in terms of people's consideration of their own golf swing. And
because the club's in your hand, you're looking at the ball, you're looking at the club head, you're trying to make the club head go into places, and they're fixated. I don't know if I've used the comparison or the analogy on this podcast, probably on the radio many times, but it's like a magician's trick, right? It's distraction. We're all looking at where Brooke Henderson's golf club head is. We're not looking at what her legs and her knees are doing because the head is what's moving. And we're wowed by the length of that swing or the apparent length of the swing. But we're not watching her lower body. And same with Tiger Woods, to a certain degree. And
almost every tour player. Yeah. Almost every tour player.
All right, the off-season's over.
Yes.
I mean, the
really
PGA Tour. First of all, how do you feel about the artificial ending before football of the season? How are you feeling about it now? I hated it last time we did a podcast. How are you feeling about it now?
It is what it is. The FedEx Cup is a neat event. It entertained me, which is what their goal was for.
So you have no different comment?
I have no different comment.
Yeah, okay.
Sitting after it a couple weeks, I was worried I would get really annoyed by the fact there was no golf on. No majors this time of year anyway, so I'm not missing that. And I don't know. I'm indifferent.
Yeah,
maybe.
It was interesting watching the U.S. Open.
Which is not a good thing for the
Canadian
PGA
girl
Tour.
win the U.S. Open. It was interesting watching the tennis. Why isn't the tennis, putting the U.S. Open in a different spot to avoid the football yesterday? Like, this whole thing to me, I just think is a mistake. And it has, to a certain degree, I think in some people's minds, wrapped up the season a little bit. And I don't think it's good for the golf industry. I don't think it was necessary. But anyway, the reason they're doing it, here we go. Now they're on it was so funny on the Golf Channel this morning, Jake. They're setting up 2019, 2020. And here we go. The season's on. And I'm thinking to myself, man, we made a real big deal about finishing off the other season 2 weeks early for a whole 2-week break.
And now
it's golf season again.
I know, in the events they want us to watch now
this week
to compete against football or the smaller events. I mean, I agree with you. It makes no sense to me. And to your point about the golf industry, I mean, the PGA Tour doesn't care about the golf industry. The PGA Tour cares about the PGA Tour and ratings, and they're doing what they think is going to get them the most ratings. I think we won't know if this is successful this year. We won't know for probably 5 years to see how successful an experiment this is practically. But I agree, it feels a little
Was it
artificial.
you who said to me the tennis coverage was so great because the analysis was awesome?
Yeah, it was fantastic.
And they didn't mention money at all.
No.
We now
until the end.
What's really interesting is golf is the sport now, the most charitable sport. So more hundreds of millions of dollars raised than any other sport. I love that model. It's one of the things that makes me proud to be in the industry. The fact that it's volunteerism and charity and give back.
It's a huge
But
part.
all we talk about is how much money the guys are making.
Well, when it comes to the FedEx Cup, that's true, right? But again, that's how they're trying to.
That's what they're doing. So they don't do that in hockey. They don't say, well, if the St. Louis Blues score here, every guy gets an extra $250,000. They don't do that in baseball. They don't do that in football. They don't do.
Now, I am going to disagree with that a little bit.
Well, they talk about the contracts, if
and
that's
the
where
drafts
you're going.
and all that stuff matters, and the all of that stuff is relevant.
It's in the news, but
during the finals, they don't. During the finals,
they do not talk about the money. They don't talk about it. They talk about the player contracts, but that's like golf's different there, I guess, because then we'd be saying Brooks Koepka just got another $10 million from Rolex or whatever we'd be saying, right? There's none of that in golf. But I just find it really interesting that they've made their entire marketing push around money, and this is how much the guys win, and isn't this cool how much money we're playing for. I just and then you know my other comment on that, which is interesting. The whispers are that Brooks Koepka is going to be the PGA Tour Player of the Year. So the PGA of America, did they give it to him or did they give it to Rory? They did it last week.
I don't recall.
Yeah, I don't know. I think who did they give it to? Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the PGA Tour, if they don't give it to Rory McIlroy, the whole thing's ridiculous.
Yeah,
because Rory
totally
McIlroy won their two biggest events. He won the Tour Championship and the Players Championship. He had the lowest stroke average. You were saying, too, it's historic how low he is, right? And
his strokes gained is second only to Tiger in his prime years since they've been recording in 2004. I mean, Rory's statistics this year were uncanny. He had the most top tens as any player on the PGA Tour. He had 2 major wins. He won what's considered their playoffs. I mean, there's a very legitimate argument, despite the major performance from a stats position, that Rory was so dominant that he should be the Player of the Year.
Yeah, but then Brooks won a major, really going away. There was a real kind of mystique to how he did it, right? He was not trash talking, but you know what Brooks is out. He's very matter of fact.
He
He's
called
super
his shot
self-confident.
and
He called his shot, and he was leading by 7 after 3 rounds. And he finished top 4 in the other 3. But the irony of the whole thing is the PGA Tour don't own any of the majors, and they're doing this whole FedEx Cup thing, and this whole Players Championship is a major because they don't own the majors. So if they turn around and vote for the guy who did the best in the majors,
it does seem silly.
It tells you what the players are thinking, right?
Absolutely.
I think Brooks Koepka is arguably the Player of the Year in the world, right? Or, you know, overall, because if you finish top 4 in all 4 majors, and win one, you've probably had the best year. But from a PGA Tour perspective, I don't understand it. And Rory McIlroy, like you said, strokes gained. I think he won almost every.
Or 2.55.
Yeah, I think he was number 2 in driving distance as well. And I also think he was top 25 in putting. So he had an incredible year from all perspectives. Interesting to watch the stats. We should give a quick shout out as Canadians to Corey Connors, who won it decidedly, greens and regulation. He's 75.06, and the next guy's 73.5 something. So he won it by 1.5%.
Yeah,
which is pretty impressive.
A full percentage point on the PGA Tour is a big deal.
Yeah, they're all within about 8 there, from number 1 to number 200. It's pretty close.
I mean, it showed he had a really good year, right? I mean, it showed how important.
Hope he makes the President's Cup. That'd be cool.
Be very cool.
Anyway, it starts this week now. Now, so much for competing against the NFL. Now we're putting the Greenbrier on. Tribute to the military at the Greenbrier, the Sanderson Farms the following week. Then the Safeway in Napa, California, the Shriners Hospital, the Vegas event. And then the Houston Open, which really, I mean, I think the poor Houston Open, they used to be the week before the Masters, and everyone would play to get ready. And now they're October 10th to 13th. And so it goes. And the first event you're looking forward to is the Zozo Championship over in Japan because Tiger's committed to play. Is that why you're excited about it?
Well, I think part of it is that Tiger being committed to it is part of it. It's the first one we're going to get to see Tiger, I believe.
You need to watch culturally in Japan, too, what the crowds are like and everything.
And that's, I think, even the more compelling argument is it's a new event, and how it goes, I think, is very interesting to me.
So October 24th to 27th, and then October 31st to November 3rd is the HSBC. And then we're kind of into the typical stuff, the Hero, and we've got President's Cup, of course, to look forward to later in December, right before Christmas, actually.
Yeah, the President's Cup I am looking forward to. I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic
And then
this
we
year.
turn the calendar. And on the ladies' side, we've got the Solheim Cup next week, which I think is great. I love the Solheim Cup. I love the history of the Cup. Ping's support of it is a pretty neat thing. Karsten Solheim, who they've announced is going into the World Golf Hall of Fame. Posthumously, but Karsten, kind of supported this thing and got it rolling, and it's pretty cool. Although it can only be so cool without Brooke Henderson playing in it from Canada, and the entire Asian and Korean contingent, right?
Well, I think, and not to mention Australia, I think that's the problem that I'm facing as a golf fan right now. As much as I love the Solheim Cup as a concept, and I've watched it, and it's one of my favorite ladies' events to watch on the LPGA Tour, the reality is that half of the best players in the world aren't playing in this event. And when you look at the President's Cup on the men's side, you know, there's great international players, but the team is never as strong as for the international side as the European side. And we've seen that in the results in the past 2 decades. But I would argue,
think, though, a rest of the world team in the ladies' game would crush the Americans.
Yeah, it would crush. And so that's
However, you know, what really should happen on the women's game is, you know, Asia versus the rest of the world is what really should be happening now when you look at the top 10 and top 20 on the LPGA Tour.
So I think, you know, they have to figure out. I think
the Americans aren't going to come up with that concept. They're not going to support that concept.
They're not. But I do think that, you know, there's an opportunity here to either rework the Solheim Cup a little bit into being a little more inclusive on both sides, because you could do North America and have, you know, a little bit of a different dynamic there, or you come up with another event. And I mean, what's the downside to that? It's another event to show off how great the ladies' game is getting.
Love team play.
Team
I
play
really
is the most
think the
exhilarating
PGA
stuff to
Tour,
watch.
or another thing they could still do. They don't have. It doesn't have to be an either or, but some really good team event. You know, like what they're doing now. They've got 1 2-man event. It's really not grabbing me. You could have 4 guys against 4 guys, and then a knockout or something. Like I think there's a way to really do it. You know, we forget in Europe at Muirfield they play foursomes all the time.
Yeah,
Muirfield Golf Club, one of the most famous clubs in the world. That's all they play. And the Walker Cup just ended. The U.S. won the Walker Cup. It just finished up, and they were saying that in their media conference that, you know, the Europeans grow up playing foursomes in different ways, right?
Well, why wouldn't they put an event in this off season or the wraparound season, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they have a couple team events? I mean, if they're already admitting that football is going to dominate the coverage,
what would you like to see?
I want. So here's one for you: President's Cup should be the event that they do both genders. I think that should be the next step for
That
both
could
of
be
them.
cool. No, I'm asking you. Hang on, answer this question first. Like, who should the teams be? Like the Vegas thing with Phil against Tiger didn't really work.
No.
But wouldn't it be neat to see?
But that only didn't work because they weren't playing for their own money.
Justin Thomas, Ricky, and Spieth, they're buddies, right? Who am I missing in there? There's a couple more. Against, who's another group of buddies? You know, you can maybe do, I know Kuchar and Stricker are buddies. And, you know, if you could come up with, and in that case, I think in a team event, the money's kind of neat. You know, you could say, knockout, $1 million, right? It'd be fun if some of them would put up their own money. I mean, that would be the best thing.
Well, that's what originally.
But then it gets really gimmicky. I think then it gets really gimmicky. But it'd be fun to have these groups.
But what's wrong? Who
would be on DJ's team?
Koepka
and DJ, and then pick 2 more. How about Cameron Champ, like the muscle guys, right?
That would be quite the event.
And Finau.
Yeah.
Finau. Oh, that'd be great. Those 4 guys, and then you got the little guys, or the Stricker, Kuchar, Zach Johnson, the real, game players, the guys who get their way around. They're not hitting the ball very far. It'd be fun.
It'd be very interesting, whether it's that or something else, to see some different formats. You know, I think that golf is so much more than just what the PGA Tour is, which is one of the great things about it. You can play any format you like, and you can enjoy any form of golf that you want, but it is underrepresented. And I think that part of the reason why they're afraid to do it is because the match play has had a couple bummer finals before that people weren't interested in, and it's a pretty high-profile event. But I think that, you know, the PGA Tour is trying to legitimize the sport by throwing money at it, and I actually think that instead of that gimmick, having a little bit of gimmick and having some different formats would bring people who are more interested to watch the game.
Let's talk shot clock.
Shot clock Masters, right?
What's your concept for the President's Cup? You intrigued me with the mixed idea.
I think the President's Cup should be mixed. I think
so you're saying 10 women and 10 men from each country, and the points all add up, or you're saying Dustin Johnson with Lexi Thompson?
I think you'd have to have some days where you do that.
The mixed days.
You maybe do alternate shot with mix.
Wouldn't that be something? Alternate shot.
I mean, and
with
that's
Morgan Pressel hitting it 210 off the tee.
So I think it could be very interesting to see. But I think if you had a legitimate President's Cup team, where even if it was still 12 people, 6 and 6 or 7 and 5, or however you want to set your team up, however those teams would be set up, with every player has to play. They could, obviously you wouldn't have Lexi Thompson straight up playing Dustin Johnson because you'd want to play from the same tees. I mean, it would be a little complicated to coordinate, but I think that is a real opportunity to make the two tours more unified. And
you see the U.S. Open, and I'm not. I heard this, but the women and men play for the same purse, which is great.
Fantastic. Right? In the tennis, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm saying U.S. Open. I'm sorry, the U.S. Open just happened, so I'm just calling it the U.S. Open.
Yeah, they play well, and I think
it's the same first prize, which is I think 3.25. They don't talk about it in the broadcast at all, but as they were giving the check to the young Canadian girl there, they said, "Here's your check for $3.25 million or something."
Yeah.
She was shocked. She didn't even know how much the prize money was.
No, and I think, that's a perfect example of how the men and the women in tennis are billed equally, right? They're equally as popular.
I'm not sure they market them equally. I'm not sure. But in tennis, for whatever reason...
But there's not less status for winning the Women's U.S. Open.
The women are the queen of the hill in sports. If you think tennis stars in sports, I think women tennis players are number one.
And another thing that's proud about golf is that golf is up there relative to most other major league sports.
Funny, team sports don't interest people that much. Like the WNBA's had a very difficult time, and even the women's soccer, where the women Americans win the gold, and they're so dominant, and it just doesn't capture people as much as the men's teams.
Yeah,
do.
For whatever reason. I mean, the thing I think though that gets proven by the tennis is that sports is the ultimate meritocracy. You get paid equal if people care as much.
Yeah.
And I think that the LPGA has done great strides in promotion to make people care more and more. They're getting paid more and more. And I think, to wrap this into what I was saying about the President's Cup, that the President's Cup would be an opportunity to further legitimize the LPGA Tour, have people who are PGA Tour fans that haven't made the jump over to watching the tour more. Watching the LPGA Tour is incredibly interesting if you're a golf fan. And I think that would be a great way to show it. And I think the thing about the President's Cup is it's a big enough event that people care about it, but it doesn't have quite the history of the Ryder Cup, so it's not like you're messing with history if you change up the event. And it would also solve the problem that we're talking about with the Solheim Cup of many of the best players in the world not participating in the team event right now, which is a huge opportunity missed by the LPGA Tour, in my opinion. So it might not be the most practical way to do it, but I think that would be incredibly fun to watch. And I think that there's a lot of arguments for it.
Solheim Cup's interesting to watch. There have been some controversies over the years. I remember Pat Bradley, I think it was in 2000, running across the green because Annika chipped in to I think it was to halve the hole. Annika chipped in. And Kelly Robbins, was it Kelly Robbins? Yeah, I think it was. Called over Pat Bradley, the captain, to say that she was away so that Annika shouldn't have hit. And they made Annika re-hit the shot, which is really catty. And I never liked that about the American ladies in the whole history of the Solheim Cup. But then who did it from Nike there?
Suzanne Petterson.
Suzanne Petterson
didn't give the controversy,
and that destroyed her career almost. Now, she's
very Kuchar of her.
Yeah, Matt Kuchary. I don't know that it destroyed her career, but I sure haven't seen her much since. And she took a lot of flack for not giving that putt. So, team events produce that kind of stuff. Remember you won't remember, you're too young, but you should re-watch it. It's got to be on YouTube.
Zinger and Seve is the famous example.
Zinger and Seve. And I mean, you could cut, those two would have pulled out switchblades if you'd have let them.
Look,
it was intense.
That's part of the great thing about team play. The players care. And I think part of the reason the players care is it's different, getting back to the different formats things. I mean,
love it.
We're basically saying all the things we would like to see as golf fans, but I think that's where team play is so fantastic. And that's why, even though I am a Ryder Cup person, more than the Solheim Cup has gotten me, I'm going to be watching the Solheim Cup. And I'm going to be interested, and I think it's going to be fun.
What do you think of the majors in 1920? St. George's, not a big fan.
Not my favorite, compared to the last couple.
The Ben Curtis, all I think about is Ben Curtis winning there. And I think that's where Todd Hamilton won, too, putting with his hybrid from here. We can't have this discussion because you weren't old enough to watch this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know St. George's that well. And the only thing I do know of it...
Elkington should have won that event, if I'm not mixing up my Open championships. Anyway... St. George's, Harding Park for the PGA Championship was another one of the incredible golf courses in about a 20-mile stretch around San Francisco.
And becoming a mainstay of, I think, that tournament. I think it's going to be a pretty stable location for them.
Yeah,
If
they
you
had
look
the
at the
President's
future
Cup there.
events.
They rebuilt it all, right? It's another. It along with Bethpage Black were the two public golf courses that were renovated and brought to tour world-class standing. So it's a real neat story there at Harding Park. And then Wingfoot, which, I'm such an idiot. Phil Mickelson in 2006 when Jeff Ogilvy won, right? And that was the best quote. That may be the best quote in golf. Hello, world, I can think of, and I'm such an idiot.
Both are fantastic for different reasons.
For very different reasons. But Mickelson blew the U.S. Open there. And Mickelson, along with Jordan Spieth and Rory, this year are trying to complete the career Grand Slam. I don't think Mickelson's going to do it. I think both of the other two guys are going to do it.
Yeah, well, interesting.
By the way, what's the Spieth thing? Get out. Do you have that Spieth
I do.
Data?
I do.
Anyway, I don't really like the Rota that much, Jake, but the majors always intrigue me so much. Wingfoot is a very, very, very difficult golf. The Massacre at Wingfoot in 74 that Hale Irwin won with an over par score. And then
which means there might be some controversy because if it doesn't play as hard with how the guys play now, people are going to be using that as the
well, they can make it hard because
USGA
it's tree lined and they can grow the rough to 6 inches and narrow in the fairways. They can make it that hard, even for the length the guys hit the ball today. I question, maybe we need a little bit more of that back in the U.S. Open. We've had Chambers Bay, which didn't work. Whistling Straits, PGA Championship, kind of didn't work, I don't think. These kind of... that style of golf works at the Open Championship. I'm not sure. Shinnecock.
Well, I think it's more viable.
Should work,
for
but they messed up the course conditions. Yeah, the PGA of America to do more diverse things. But I want to talk about Jordan Spieth, and everyone's saying, "Oh, poor Jordan's got the yips," and Jordan is struggling with his putting. And what are the numbers? They're crazy.
Yeah, so Jordan Spieth would have self-admitted that until this year he had been struggling. However, Jordan Spieth in 2019 was first in, here we go, overall putting average, actual putting average, one putt percentage, average distance of putts made per round, putts from 10 feet to 15 feet made, putts from over 25 feet made, second in strokes gained putting overall on the tour, and second in overall birdie conversion on the green.
That tells me he's really hitting it bad.
Yeah, it is, because that's the best his numbers have ever been. This is better than he was in 2015 with his putting. And those numbers are staggering, and he must
considering too, Jake, one
so
putt conversion. I guess he's missing a lot of greens, so he's chipping close. But on the greens he is hitting, he's not hitting it that close.
But it's also second in birdie conversion. So he's second in birdie conversion. He's making a lot of birdies. The problem is I thought Rory was
impressive at 24th or whatever he is in putting, but that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, staggering, and it shows you how much you need a complete game to play the PGA Tour. I mean, that's also probably why, if you look at Jordan, he had so many instances where he had 3 fantastic rounds.
So he'll get the career Grand Slam because he will figure out his golf swing. He will fix it. He won't figure it out. I can help him with it if he needs help because it's a mess right now. But when you have touch and feel in a putting game like that, how do you not win one more, right? How do you not do that? It's amazing.
Well, especially
and Rory, too, is so good. The only thing about Rory, like Greg Norman at the Masters, like Ernie Els, 2 guys from my generation who should have won several. They'll never be at that Champions Dinner on Tuesday night because the ghosts at Augusta National make crazy things happen, right? Tiger won this year, Jack in 86. Stuff happens at Augusta National.
I do though, however, think that this potentially was a pivotal year of growth for Rory on that department. And I say that for 2 reasons. I think missing the cut at the British Open was actually going to be a positive in the long run because it gutted him. However, the stuff he said after the round was incredibly different for him. It was vulnerable. It was open. And not that he's not normally like that, but it was very clear that he realized something was wrong with pressure in tournaments. And then how he handled the FedEx Cup and his quotes on Sunday saying that he realized he's been trying to make Sundays too much like a normal golf round, and it's not. And he felt that Sunday he stepped up to the plate.
Everyone needs a different... You've got to figure out emotionally what you need. Some people do need to make it just another round to survive it.
Totally.
So it's interesting that he's thinking, that didn't work, I really do have to embrace the size of it.
So if I remember, I might be misquoting slightly, but I believe his exact words were, "I rose to the occasion this time." And
he did the same thing at the British Open. He was saying to everybody, that he was saying to everybody that it's just another event, and listen, whether I do well or not, it's just another event. He was trying to paint with that same brush.
And
at
I
the
think
Open
that failure
Championship.
maybe is what awakened him to it. And then losing to Koepka at the WGC, who wanted a little bit of revenge on Koepka that he talked about at the FedEx Cup. I think those things kind of made him step up. And I think whether he considers that the real level of a major or not, I think it's an example of him stepping up to the plate and it working. And I think he'll take that into the Masters, maybe not this year or next year.
The easiest way to get motivated is to have someone trounce you. I think, if you say...
At that level.
At any level, in any sport, if you hate the opposition, Canada playing Russia in hockey, you rise and do whatever you got to do to win, and you don't have that. You think Canada playing Russia in 72 had the trepidation of what if we lose this game? They just went out there for blood, right?
Well,
literally.
Jordan.
Bobby Clark breaking ankles.
Yeah. Michael Jordan said, I'd rather die than lose. The guys at this level have that mentality. You don't get to that level of Rory McIlroy without having that mentality.
To a certain degree, but when you're an uber talent, I don't think Rory is I'd rather die than lose. He's been spending the last 10 years telling us that, these are great guys out here and they're all really good and I just play another event. Like, he hasn't been saying I'd rather die than lose. So, I know he's got tons of self-confidence. But anyway, this isn't dissecting what he's done wrong or anything. I'm just saying, I always found as a competitor, if I was 2 down to a guy I didn't like, it was way easier to get focused and determined than if I was 2 down to someone, but they were either a good friend or I thought they were actually a little better than me. And then you had to kind of think, I got to get over this hurdle. Whereas if you just didn't like the guy, you just went for it, right? So it's interesting.
Yeah, but he didn't step up to the plate against Reed, and I don't think Rory and Reed are that friendly with the Ryder Cup.
I don't know.
history.
Reed's over in Europe now, playing a bunch of events in Europe. So
I do.
I'm warming up to Patrick Reed.
Are you?
I don't want to go to dinner with him.
I think he's a good villain.
Yeah, but you know what? He's gone through some things this year. Well, let's not talk about Patrick Reed. It's a short show. Let's not talk about Patrick Reed.
No.
All right, let's use, what we can do, though? We can segue into our teaching, which is the thing I like to do the most. Through Jordan Spieth. And you mentioned this to me when we were chatting about this topic that, such great putting, such a mediocre year, and he's really struggling with his setup. And I think he's really struggling with his leg action and his wind up, right? So let's talk a little bit about body coil. And, you grew up listening to me. You're kind of biased, right? It's hard because your swing philosophies will clearly be similar to mine, but you can't overstate the value of coil.
But and that's a totally fair point. However, I will say that as someone who has become obsessive about looking stuff up and learning what people's philosophies are and doing stuff, I come to the same conclusion regardless of how I was brought up.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that Jordan Spieth right now, as I agree with you, is a good example of how it can go wrong even at the highest level. I mean, Spieth's lines at address are not clean. His back hip, the hip bone, is kicked up too much,
and out,
which means his pelvis is not level at the start of his golf swing, which inhibits proper rotation. His shoulders, as a result, are tilted back too much to counter it, so from the front it doesn't look as awkward.
Yeah, he hasn't lined up his pelvic center with his chest center at all, right?
And that over up of the back hip and the down of the back shoulder creates a curvature in the spine that makes rotation inhibited, makes it much harder to hit the ball properly.
Why can't he figure it out? I mean, he's got the same biomechanics. We've got Gears 3D Motion here. I'm sure he's been on that machine.
I'm sure he has, or something similar, yeah, for sure.
Why can't he figure it out?
Well, I don't know if it's a matter of can't or a matter of priority. I know that I
don't know.
I heard him in it.
You look in a mirror. So this is what I'd say to people based on that comment. Like, one of the most important things to do is set yourself up right. Canadians always ask me, what should I do in the winter? What should I do in the winter? And I'm like, fitness. So let's work on core strength. Let's work on flexibility. And let's get your lines and your takeaway perfect. You don't even have to hit balls. You get in front of a full-length mirror, and you face the mirror, and you get yourself set up perfectly. Weight 50-50. Your trailing hip should look a little lower than your lead hip at address. If you look in a mirror and your trail hip, your back hip, your right hip for a right-handed player looks higher than your left hip, you're not, I can't say you're not going to be able to. I'm going to say it
makes it harder.
It makes it much more difficult to turn into that back leg and wind up like you're supposed to. So when Jordan Spieth looks in a mirror and sees that hip all cockeyed, it looks like his right leg is actually 1.5 inches longer than his left. Like, I don't know what it's doing out there. If I'm Cameron McCormick or I'm Jordan, I'm like, hey, bump that hip in about 1 inch. Oh, that looks better. Like, it's not a complicated fix. So when you talk priority, to me, the golf swing is it's building blocks. It's like a series of dominoes. And if you can't set up over the ball properly and look right at address, how can you expect for the next position to be right and the next position and knock over the next domino and the next one? Yeah. And I tell everybody the most important thing about the top of your backswing is you're in a position to be able to do a proper downswing and a move forward. So, you've got to get yourself set up over a mirror properly. And one of the keys to me is to have your hips centered underneath your pelvis or over your legs and have that trailing hip down just a touch, because you're a little tilted with your upper body, right? You're tilted 2 to 4 to 5 degrees depending on the club, to allow for the bottom hand to get on the golf club and to allow the ball to be a little more forward towards your lead ear. So you can't have that back hip kicked up, or you're right, you need a curved spine to actually stand over the ball properly.
Not to mention, it's going to make you typically reverse pivot in your backswing, because what happens is your body, when those lines are crisscrossed, when your lower body is not at least level and straight up and down, and your upper body is angling back, something's got to give, because those two things torquing in different directions is incredibly hard on your body.
Yeah.
And usually your legs aren't moving around enough to be the thing that gives, so your rib cage will recenter itself over your pelvis, or your back will tilt towards the target, and you'll wind up reverse pivoted. And it to me, if you watch Jordan Spieth, it's pretty clear.
It's like a teeter-totter move.
He over
tilts. He over tilts.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for
it.
In the backswing, and then on the way down, he has to fall back. And one thing Jordan Spieth does with the weak grip and his arms on such a good path is he keeps the face very square, and he has very little rotation through impact. And I think he does feel like leading his hands out a little bit allows him to do that. And some of that makes it look more tilty than it probably even is in the downswing. But that's why he hits those big blocks.
Yeah, your head cannot fall backwards in your swing.
And,
it's a really bad thing.
And it's a pretty straightforward thing. Again, to me, I agree with you as a golf teacher to look at Jordan Spieth's setup like that, see how that move is likely, and whether he does a better version of it and rotates better than most people in those positions or not, so he's a good player. I mean, we do have to remember he looked somewhat like this in 2015, and
he did. He's always looked like this. I've never looked at him and said, wow, I'm going to use that video to show my pube.
And he was first strokes gained approach that year. So the guy can hit a golf ball, but it makes all the sense in the world to me why he can't hit a driver with that setup because of what we just said. And
yeah, so over the golf ball, hips level, if not the trailing hip down a touch.
Yes.
And then a nice clean spine tilt 2 to 5 degrees away from the target with your upper spine,
Agreed.
And then when you look at the down the line view, the side view, you kick those hips back. Hogan used to say, like you're sitting on a bar stool, and you get balanced, right? You need to kick your bum back to center yourself. You don't bend forward to a golf ball. You actually kick your hips back, and then your spine moves forward. So it's counterbalancing.
Well,
the weight of my thighs and my glutes, my bum, kind of offset my chest and my head moving forward because the ball's on the ground and I'm centered in my feet.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to most people when you explain it too. And also what I was going to say there was that it also lets you do that or get athletic in a relaxed manner, right? I actually think that there's a bit of a thing going on online with golf teachers or on the Golf Channel a little bit that's anti-traditional posture. And I think what's happening is a lot of these people are conflating traditional posture with stress. I mean, a perfect example, I had a lesson yesterday. The guy had a pretty good move, but it was very, very stiff, and he didn't coil very well. And it's partially because over the golf ball, his back was perfectly straight. If anything, it was almost had a slight arc in the bottom of his back because his tailbone was so far out. His knees were overflexed. His arms were too locked. And if you didn't know what you're looking at, it looked like you want to look like compared to the guys on TV, but you can't rotate if your body is tense.
Yeah, you've also got to have, it was interesting, I didn't tell you this yet, but your uncle, John, who played Australian Open, Asia, Australia, went to Purdue.
Fantastic
won
golfer,
big championships here in Canada. He's struggling. Now, he's got a little bit of curvature in his spine, and he's fighting the Jordan Spieths a little bit, the right hip up a bit, and I've talked to him about this many times, trying to push his right hip down, his trailing hip. Anyway, he sent me a video the other day of his golf swing and said, "God, I can't rotate through the ball. I'm thrusting, and I'm hitting these block hooks, and what am I going to do?" And I looked at the video and I said, "Well, the first thing you've got to address, John, that in your backswing you're thrusting forward. Your mid pelvis is coming towards the ball in your backswing." And so you're reacting to that, right? Your posture's constantly changing in your golf swing. Anyway, there's no thrust, by the way, in golf. Your belt buckle, everyone listening, should never move forward. To coil properly, and we've got to get into our coil conversation, although how you set up
coil, yeah.
How you set up is so important. So your belt buckle moves sideways and back into your right bum cheek, and then it moves sideways and back into your left bum cheek. It never moves towards the ball. That's called thrust, and you don't want any of that in golf. Anyway, it was interesting. So he also sent the video to Steve Bann. Now, Steve Bann, you may not know the name, but he's one of the great teachers of this generation. Stuart Appleby, Robert Allenby, many others. Great golf teacher. And John does some emotional intelligence work with him. Your uncle does some emotional intelligence work with him. First thing Steve said, you're thrusting in your backswing. He said, at address, your hips are too far back. You're trying to have too perfect posture. You've got to get your hip bones over your ankle bones. And if your hips don't line up with your ankles, right? If you're not centered with your hip bone over your ankle bone, then you'll adjust and you'll thrust back and forward in your golf swing. So you can't kick your bum back too far either. If you kick it way, way back, then you get yourself in trouble as well.
And that's where the stress comes from, right? So some modern golf teachers are starting to almost teach tailbone in to get it over the ankles more. Yeah. And I think that is a mistake. I think it gets you too upright.
Like everything in golf, Jake, if you look at both Tiger and Nicklaus, they both had very relaxed posture, slouchy shoulders a bit, right? When we look at Tiger in our video that I took from him at 2007 at President's Cup at Royal Montreal, I mean, he doesn't have bum way back, right? That clean, and I like to teach that clean posture. I really do. I think that's a better way to have most slouchy, bend forward people think about it. But tucking the bum in a little bit to make sure your balance is perfect is not a terrible thing. The problem we have in teaching golf, Jake, let me just finish the sentence and then I'm all in to listen to you. I mean, I think for some people, tucking the bum in a bit and rounding the lower back is a great idea, but Golf Digest will do a story on some guy who says this is a secret, and then we get carried away and we teach everybody to do it.
That's a good point.
From stack and tilt to everything else. So I don't mind the couple of guys online who are saying make sure you don't kick your bum out too far and get that reverse arc in your back. But again, we're all going to think that's the secret, get carried away, and it's going to become this stupid fad. So back to what you were saying. I'm sorry, but
no, but we're arguing for the same point, because all I was going to say is I think the problem is the conflation with clean lines and kicking your hip back a little bit is being conflated with overdoing it like John was, right? So I do agree that you want to be relaxed. I think a little bit of softness in your shoulders for a lot of people, especially if your posture is not good naturally. If you're not shoulders back in your natural state, you probably are going to look a little more rounded than a 25-year-old athlete that is in that posture naturally. Mm-hmm. I think that's okay. I think relaxed is important because relaxed lets you coil. Making sure you're not overdoing things in any capacity makes it coil. Whether tailbone's in or tailbone's out too much, both are a problem.
Yeah.
But
most people are in too much. By the way, most people slouch.
That's where I have the problem with the comments that you're talking about with Golf Digest, is that everybody kind of sticks their tailbone in and bends their shoulders forward, and everything's kind of hunched over.
What is it about this sport of ours that everybody wants a system? Like, we're such lemmings, right? Stack and tilt comes to mind. I mean, everybody just thought this was reinventing the golf swing. And, I mean, for God's sake.
I truly think.
How about natural, balanced, athletic motion? How about that?
I truly think it's because it's such a difficult game, and the majority of people don't take lessons, and the majority of people are just looking for quick things, and they're willing to chase the rabbit. And then you mix a little bit of the fact that because there's so many different moving parts in golf that are not reacting to something like other sports, that we forget that a natural athleticism is required to be at the top level of this game.
You use the chase the rabbit thing. I think Golf Digest and Golf Channel are willing to sell the rabbit too because it gives them ratings, right? Like, hey, let's put these guys on that. That's really cool. Let's throw these guys on TV, or let's put these guys in a magazine.
But
right?
people must also, but they do that because people in golf are uniquely looking for that.
Yeah.
They don't do that in football because people aren't looking to figure out exactly how a certain running back.
Yeah, it's different because we play golf. We don't play
guys.
football. So.
It's not the same thing.
Okay, so all of that to say that you got to stand over the ball in balance and get in a proper position. But I think fundamentally, I'm not sure people really understand that winding up in golf, you turn into your leg. You actually wind yourself up from the top. And whether you're talking Ben Hogan in 57, 5 lessons, whether you're talking John Jacobs, Practical Golf in 1972, whether you're talking Nick Bradley, 7 Laws of the Golf Swing, whether you're talking 8-Step Swing by Jim McLean, Golf Swing by David Ledbetter, they're all talking about coiling and winding up. And yet, I don't know what it is. Most players still think you should try to get bigger in your backswing and lift. And so in trying to make the arm swing bigger, that arm swing affects the body and pulls it up or moves it laterally. As the arms swing back, the body swings with it into a typical sway. Or as the arms swing up, we lift out of posture. And it's an epidemic. I mean, and it won't go away. And I've just listed golf books that explain to turn into the back leg and keep the angle of the back leg the same and keep the back knee flexed and, all of this stuff. But people still have this impression that they should lift and get bigger in their backswing.
Well, if we're honest, the majority of people aren't reading these swing books, right? The majority of
none
people
of them are, I guess.
Walking into a driving range.
You understand my point? This isn't new.
No, of
this
course
isn't
it's not
like
new.
somebody
No.
last year said biomechanics prove this. I mean, I've got a Ben Hogan book who talks about.
No, biomechanics have validated it, but they haven't brought it up when it wasn't a factor before. And I the only thing I can think of is I guess people are trying it for the first time. They see the ball on the ground. They know the club has to go over their shoulder, so they figure it's an up and down game. If I make myself bigger, I'll hit it harder, and it feels strong to do that. And some people don't figure this out properly. But even the general golfer who knows not to lift but to rotate over-rotates incorrectly because they don't understand exactly what you mentioned, exactly that you have to wind into the back legs. So what is true is that the biggest thing that most professional players have in their golf swing that amateur players don't is an early severe amount of chest turn, right? The average pro is as much as 30 to 45 degrees rotated with their chest at 9 o'clock with their golf swing. But people hear that and they say, I'll turn everything more. And they try turning their legs and rotating too much.
I think generally speaking, well, let's attack a couple of things. First of all, so the lifting thing or the shifting is a killer. If your weight gets to the outside of your back leg because you're shifting, trying to make your golf swing big and long, it's really hard to move forward. We're back to that question. The most important thing about the top backswing is you can move down properly. And if you move to the outside of your back leg, you're in big trouble. And then the lifting out of posture, the rising. When you visualize someone throwing a discus or a shot put or even a quarterback kind of flexing back in the pocket, bracing against that back leg to then extend forward to throw that ball, no one gets bigger. You never see a quarterback up straightening their legs and being up on their tippy toes to throw the ball. There's something that golfers just don't connect with that thought that rising up is Jim McLean back in the 8-Step Swing, he had these death moves with the little skull and crossbones. I would say coming out of posture, lifting up in your backswing, you'll see very, very, very few golf pros do that.
Well, it's the changing of posture as we were talking about before with thrust and everything, right?
But changing, you have to do it because you're in bad positions or you don't understand, or you have flexibility limitations or many other things we could discuss in explaining to people what they need to coil properly. But shifting laterally and lifting up and getting taller is a complete killer. So that's a whole topic point now you talk about what you're saying, Jake, which is the winding part. And this, I think, is the most important thing that you and I can get across to the average player is how to wind and feel the muscles. Many, many, many people out there, they look like they've got beautiful golf swings, but they're not winding up. And so I've always equated that to two sports cars. One's got a monster engine under the hood and one doesn't. And they both look great from a distance, but one's got power under the engine, under the hood, and the other does not. And that's the case with many people who are looking for distance, that they look like they've got these big full backswings, but when you look at how they've wound up or where all their muscles are and what position they're not in the right position at all. And it's a subtle thing. How many lessons have you given where we turn people in front of a mirror, and if they just let the weight go a little to the outside of the hip or straighten the leg a little bit or drop the front shoulder a bit too much, there's no wind up there at all. And it looks pretty close to the right move, but it's not until you kind of force them into a position. And, you know, John Jacobs said that the average person, I think there's an overstatement, but in his book Practical Golf, which is, I think, a must-read for people still today, you know, he said that most people, it feels stiff and kind of awkward, or there can be a little bit of angst in the move, the tension, so they avoid it, which I don't think is necessarily right.
I think that could be true if you do it statically in front of a mirror, right? A great way that we get people to practice doing this is, even if you're between sets at a gym or at home walking past your mirror, if you put your arms on your shoulders crisscrossed like you're, you know, laying in a coffin, and you go to turn your chest and keep your legs a little more stable, trying to create that wind like a spring. If you hold that position to feel the pressure, to know you're doing it right, that does feel tougher than it does when you swing a golf club.
There's some tension, but there's no pain or anything.
No.
I don't
Not
know
if
why
you're doing
people
it
would
properly
avoid
at all.
it.
No.
That's all I'm saying. I don't know why people would avoid the move. I feel the spring load. I feel the energy in my body. And I wish people could climb into a pro's body just to feel a couple of swings so they'd identify with what it properly feels like. But what basically should happen with the body, you wind into yourself. So the chest turns as the arms swing, which is the old one-piece takeaway, triangle takeaway. Like you said, it should all start. Jackie Burke, one of my favorites, he's still alive down at the Champions Club down in Houston. He's got great things to say. And I think one of his sayings was the average golfer should start their swing by pulling their trail shoulder back. That's how you start your golf swing, is to turn your chest, to start it. And then the arms stay in front of you. You got the triangle takeaway, which when I was a kid, you taught the one-piece takeaway, right? The triangle. What are you smirking at?
I just love that your comment about him is he's still alive.
Well, he's like 94. He's like... Hey, you just referred to a coffin.
No, it just hit me funny. It was just the way he said it.
Well, I guess you could call him and check if he said it or not. But he said the average golfer should start by pulling back the back shoulder. So you're right. The upper body starts the swing. The arms do swing up as the body turns into itself.
Absolutely. But
I think if you focus on turning your chest, you'd be way better off than most golfers that we teach, right? The arms stay extended and you turn the chest. If all of you check yourself at waist high with the golf club, that 9 o'clock position, if you look in a mirror and your trailing arm is bent, your back arm's bent, that's because you're not turning your chest enough.
Totally.
Right? And the club is actually getting behind you way out of position.
And that can trick a lot of people because they've maybe read golf tips and they know where the club should appear to be at the takeaway.
You're right. They're just looking at that position, right?
And so the club looks to be in a very good position, and they don't notice the 10 to 20 degrees of shoulder difference, and they go, well, why did I wind up? And usually it manifests in the club getting behind them at the top of their swing too much.
Yeah, you tell some people to turn, and the club ends up way behind their bums and way out of position. So
totally.
You do have to learn how to swing the arms up as you turn the chest. This is the hard thing about golf. This is why you need lessons. You can't really train yourself because turning your body and your waist is on one plane and your shoulders are on another plane and then the arms swing up. The odds of you stumbling into doing all that at the same time are pretty slim, which is why it needs coaching. But then if you do it right, it looks very natural because everything's doing what it should do.
It's the way your body's meant to work. It's just because golf is not a reactionary game where we're reacting to stimulus and naturally just letting our bodies take over like you do in football, like you do in soccer or hockey. I can keep naming sports. That's what makes it counterintuitive. So you don't assume. You're thinking that the goal is your golf
to
ball,
a certain degree,
and you're lifting the golf club, and you're doing things that are natural, and then you groove that pattern. That's the bigger problem, right?
Yeah,
is that you don't start off doing it right, and then you've grooved these bad patterns, and the proper motion all of a sudden feels so abnormal to you, when really, if you had started with that motion, it would have felt the most natural thing in the world.
Okay,
and
I want
once
to
you
read
master
this.
it does again.
I want to read this because it's important for what we're talking about here. This is 5 Lessons, most famous golf book ever. Ben Hogan, 57. The guy figured it out in the dirt, right? I mean, he might have had the odd video footage of himself, blurry, crackly video, but we're talking 57 here. Amazing. And mind you, this is not my Bible. I think there's a few things wrong. He teaches too weak a grip, first of all, because he hooked the ball. And there are things in here that I don't love, having read everyone's book now. But this is really intriguing. This is from 1957. On the backswing, the shoulders are always ahead of the hips as they turn. The shoulders start turning immediately. The hips do not. Just before your hands reach hip level, the shoulders as they turn automatically start pulling the hips around. As the hips begin to turn, they pull the lead leg to the, well, he says left leg to the right, but they pull the lead leg in a little bit. I always go ambidextrous because we're Canadian, 25%
Yeah,
of
Hogan
golfers
was
are
really
left
worried
up
about
here.
lefties.
He says turning the hips too soon is an error countless golfers make, and it's a serious error. It destroys your chance of obtaining the power a correctly integrated swing gives you. I love that. Integrated muscles, working against each other. As you begin the backswing, you must restrain your hips from moving until the turning of the shoulder starts to pull them around. So, 1957, the info's been around a long time, and he really was the first to teach the modern swing. I think if you watch Bobby Jones and different equipment earlier, whippy, hickory stuff, there was a lot of rotation, a lot of movement. It was more of a rhythmy swing. Hogan was the first to kind of get the Nautilus. I tell people that. You ever get in a Nautilus machine and, you put your hands in front of you and you turn your upper body, torque against your lower body, and your lower body stays in the seat in the Nautilus machine to torque around, right? To build core strength and to build up your, what are the side lats in your abs called again?
Your lats.
Your lats. So what are the horizontal ones in front called? Your upper and your lower? Anyway, it doesnn matter.
We're getting past our. Let's not speak out of turn. I'm not saying.
No,
that
you know what?
As
As soon as I get out, we're not physiotherapists here, but you do that twisting exercise in a Nautilus machine, right, where there's resistance involved. It's more efficient motion, and it's using parts of the body against other parts of the body. And that's exactly what the golf swing that Hogan started talking about, where the upper body's turning, but the lower body's resisting a little bit, and you build what is now known commonly as X factor, right? And the X factor is turning the chest against the hips. The bigger the X, the more torque, the more energy, the more spring load, the more power. You still have to load the lower body. We're going to get to that in a second.
That's the other thing I was going to say and that's where maybe this stuff's been updated a little bit. I think where you said some of what Jim McLean was a little overdone, I think saying restrict the hips is a little too aggressive of a term. You do need to let your hips rotate properly because you can't unwind what you didn't wind. However, where I think the point is bang on is you can't gain torque in a spring by turning the whole spring.
Yeah, top and bottom.
You do need to have a less turning down half of your body, waist, right?
Yeah.
And that's where, and I do think
I think a lot of people, though, Jake, who you teach too, they start their golf swing by turning everything. The lead knee is working at the exact same time the club turns away from the ball.
That's what I was getting at
earlier. And the hips
earlier.
are turning too. So giving a lot of people the idea of restraining, not letting those hips move until that club gets to waist high or close to it, it's really impactful.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say next is as much as it's maybe a little bit over aggressive in terms of its terminology, you might need that feeling as the average golfer, right? Your hips should turn a little bit, allow them to be a little bit turned so you can turn into the hip and not thrust, as we were talking about earlier. But so many people...
if you're not careful, if you restrict the hips too much, Jake...
And I guess that's what I'm saying.
Then your pelvis comes forward. Then you do thrust because you're acting against the stress of it, right?
And I'm guilty of that sometimes. That I worked so hard a long time to not let my hips turn that my hips almost bail out the wrong way because they have to have some give to allow my shoulders to turn. So I think they do need to rotate. You do need to turn into the hip. But I do agree, and this is where I think, you like I said, you can't get torque out of a spring where the bottom's moved too much. And you do need to make sure if you are moving it too much that it might feel like a restriction. That's why I like, keep it tight and keep it coiled better than restrict or solid. You don't want to feel like a gangster put cement in your shoes and your feet don't move,
I'm just looking up muscle names. Your obliques. The external obliques are the side ones. That's actually the name I was looking for. Your obliques are your side ones. And the albas, and I'm just looking up the names here. But it's the obliques was the name I was looking for. The twisting kind of thing? When we were in college at Illinois, we used to sit on the end of a weight bench, just a typical weight bench, with our feet on the ground and our knees locked together. we'd get spotted. And if you separated your legs or your feet, your knees moved around, it wasn't a good thing. And we just put a weight bar behind our shoulders, over our shoulders, and grab it like, you see a hockey player in a warm-up twisting, right, with the hockey stick over their shoulders. And we'd have to twist both ways with a 20-pound weight bar and hold it. And it was really interesting when we started. I mean, that's very rudimentary, I guess. But when I go down there in August for training, you could barely get around 90 degrees, and you could almost get yourself to the point where you could turn that weight bar. Oh, gee whiz. Well, like Brooke Henderson would turn the weight bar almost 45 more, right? I mean, it'd be almost 135 degrees around. And if you can really build up that flexibility in your obliques, in all your abs and everything, if you can rotate bigger and do that kind of thing, then do some wood chop type exercises to strengthen the area. But building the flexibility in your core is, I think, a critical element to building the spring effect, right? And getting yourself able to get into the right positions in golf. And then you've got to really stretch out your groin and your legs and your hamstrings and all your hip flexors so you can actually turn in without thrusting forward. If you can't turn into that leg properly because you're not flexible enough. I do that. It's interesting. Maybe tell people what you do. But I thrust forward about 1 point. Well, we've had me on Gears 3D Motion 1.7 inches forward because I'm not flexible enough in my trailing hip. So as I turn back, the hip just resists, right? It's not locked up. And a lot of middle-aged men have this situation, not enough stretching. And so then your pelvis comes forward and you're out of balance, right?
Well, and as a side note, I think that's why so many teaching pros encourage players to have shorter feeling golf swings. It's not because we think shorter is better. Right? If your swing can be Brooke Henderson and you can swing longer with the lower body turning properly a minimized amount and your chest rotating properly against that, go for it. If you're able to do that with your body, do it. The problem is most of us can't because of physical limitations. So when you start to overdo it and you over-rotate the hips and you over-rotate your shoulders relative to what you're able to do, that's when the weight, as you said earlier, gets to the outside of the trail foot. You wind up not being able to swing down properly. You don't coil properly, so your obliques and your core is weaker. You can't turn through as fast, and all these things start domino affecting you, hitting it worse.
Mm-hmm.
To what you were saying,
I don't even like down. I like forward. I know it's semantics, but downswing feels like you're up and down, whereas backswing and forward swing.
Good point.
We tend to say backswing and downswing. It's really backswing and forward swing, or up and down with the arms.
Yeah, it's a swing to your target, not a swing to the ball.
The body should be coiling and winding in posture. Yeah. Okay, so the chest turns up to 45 degrees even by that point, certainly. Full turn we'd consider around 90. Many of you should consider the fact that since you're not as flexible as what we recommend as average, trying to make your swing look longer by over-rotating, you must be cheating, right? This is a big part of all
that's what I was
this,
just
right?
getting at, yeah.
So we turn the chest as the club reaches waist high, the belt reacts. The belt moves a couple inches around, not even a lot. The belt buckle, if you look at a good player's belt buckle, it's only moving a few inches back and around. And you'll feel the weight naturally go into your back thigh and your inner knee and your inner foot. You'll feel that. You need to, and you were touching on this point, Jake, you've got to wind the spring. You can't wind both ends of the spring, but you also can't not wind the spring. So you need to allow the weight to almost go towards the heel, but you've got to have a sense of resisting it and hanging
heel.
on, right?
Be clear for people, right? Inside of your heel.
Yeah, the outside heel's a disaster.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going back into the foot, into the leg. If you're turning deep into the hip, there's another thing that I think has confused people who think it's okay to straighten the trailing leg. Because when you turn deeper into the hip, if you've got that flexibility and your bum cheek goes back more, it looks like the leg is straightening, right? But it's still maintaining flex as we load weight into it.
Yeah, well, what's happening is that the leg is extending as your pelvis rotates onto the leg muscle. And so from the front or even down the line, there looks like a straightening effect there. But if you actually, we've mentioned this on the podcast before in a previous episode.
The knee isn't straightening.
You actually, if anything, gain flex and there's more of an angle in your knee because it's setting into your hip better, right?
It's a little confusing looking at the biomechanics from face on and down the line and behind. You can get different things. That's one problem I have with people who post stuff online, says this proves my theory.
With one picture, yeah.
You take a picture from a different angle, right? There's so many moving parts at any given time. And to finish that off, the lead knee comes in towards the trailing knee. That's another one of my killer moves, is when people move towards the golf ball, not only thrusting their pelvis forward in their backswing, but their upper bodies too, because their front leg is bending forward. It's moving forward towards the ball. It's not getting pulled in towards the back leg.
Not to mention, that gets too much pressure onto your lead toe. So we just talked about, turning your body into the leg, which brings your weight or the pressure into the ground, into the inside of your trail heel. If you bend your knee forward and kind of come forward, now it's in your lead toe. Yeah. And there's no way to transfer to that position.
Think of the balance, everybody. If your lead leg comes forward and your head goes forward, now you're totally out of balance, right? So I think really spending some time working in front of a mirror, taking a few lessons and learning how to wind up the body in posture. So the shoulders turn on their plane. The waist stays on a different plane because the hips turn differently. They don't all turn together. They don't all turn the same amount. They don't all turn at the same time. And it's so constructive for people to finally understand what the body should do, and so many people don't. So basically, upper body turns over a resisting or a stable lower body. What term do you like better? You don't like resisting because you got to be careful. You got to let the hips turn.
No, I'm okay with resisting. I don't like the term restrict. That's the difference. Because too many beginners over-interpret the word restrict, and then they don't move their lower body at all.
People overdo everything. When I was a kid, when I was your age, sorry, but I don't mean to insult you with that, but when I was a kid teaching, I think of that 25 years ago, I taught sit into the back knee. Sit into the knee. That was a Ledbetter thing, which I think sit kind of infers move sideways and drop. Although I would say more flex in the backswing rather than less is a better miss, right?
Yes.
But turning into that back leg and feeling the weight on the inside of the thigh. And really, Jake, I think we would tell people we feel the pressure on the inside of the leg. We almost want to start our downswing with our legs to get out of that pressure. It's not a painful pressure. It's not anything. It's just you kind of turn into that back leg and like brace against it, brace against it, brace against it. And then, the first thing to naturally come out of that, like a spring unwinding, is the lower body wants to move forward. So that's how you avoid your slice, everybody. You get in the right position with your body at the top so that you can unwind from the ground up. We wind from the top, we unwind from the bottom. And if you can get your body to work the right way, you've really got the game not necessarily beat, because you could roll your face open, you could use your wrists improperly. You could put the club on a terrible path. You could have the wrong club.
You've got the foundation you need.
The dog, and then you got to worry about the tail wagging. Now the dog is there. Now we got to wag the tail, right? So, anyway, what starts the downswing? What starts the forward swing? Let's use that terminology. It's better.
So, once you've built that coil using your upper body, turning into the lower body, like any sport where you step into the target, it is then the lower body that initiates that motion. I know different golf teachers or different players have said some feel the rolling of the ankle initiates, or the driving of a knee, or a subtle
turn the
bump
hip. Hogan
of the
said
hip.
Turn the hips, which I think is a terrible verbiage, because you've got to have that lateral move, that step.
That was him, though, as you said. That was him fighting a hook. He was such a
he
hooker
wanted
of
to
the
be
golf
Dustin
ball
Johnson.
That he wanted to turn to avoid driving the legs, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that's where that comes from. But I think a lateral move into the target, onto your ankle, bumping your thigh over your ankle, so you get that slide into the golf ball is the thing that starts. And doing that with your body first, allowing your hands to be patient and allowing that to happen, is why the club set's back on plane.
We don't see enough great leg action today. With the golf ball that goes so straight and the hot faces, it's harder to learn for juniors because they watch Justin Thomas and Jordan Spieth's leg action, and it's not move to the front leg and then turn as much, right?
To bring it back, they all need to
Steve
watch
Elkington.
Rory.
Everybody go to YouTube and watch Steve Elkington hit a golf ball. That was leg action. Or Hogan. Watch Hogan drive those legs to the target and then rotate. You know, it was leg action, right? Move onto the lead leg and then rotate to square the face. And that really is how it works. We turn into the back leg, and then we bump over onto the front foot, and then we turn onto the front leg. So it's a rotate or coil or wind into the back bum cheek, back knee, back foot. Just get turned into that flexed leg. So you've got a little resistance there, and then you can use your lower body to lead the downswing. And that winding and unwinding is that extra 50, 70 yards I talked about earlier in the show. You've got the same driver as me. Your arms swing as far as mine do. Why am I hitting it 50 yards past you, everybody? And the answer is the big muscles in the body winding and unwinding properly. Not to mention when your body works athletically, you know, the whole thing is just a little more simple, right? You're in balance. It's moving naturally. This is another thing. We talked stack and tilt earlier. I mean, come on. Every sport in the world, we load onto the back foot, we unload onto the front foot. A quarterback doesn't keep his weight on his front foot when he's getting ready to throw a ball. There's all kinds of techniques out there. I wish everyone, just like a balanced, healthy diet is the best way to go through life for health, you know, not a gimmick diet. The best way to play golf is to get balanced and athletic, move your muscle groups back away from the ball when you're winding up and move them into the ball when you're hitting through the ball to a finish, right? It's so simple to me.
Yeah, I agree. And just as a thing to kind of add one final little layer to this, that doesn't mean, for the record, that throwing your legs at it is the answer.
No.
There's a reason why I said you want to slide your thigh over your ankle. That kind of 3 to 6 inch bump, depending on your width of stance, is all you want. And then you rotate from there. So you lead with the downswing. You get over your ankle.
What would you say leads the move? It's a really hard question to answer.
I think it's lower body.
I've never thought about it because I'm loaded so well that I never have to think about how to start my downswing. It always starts from the bottom. But
so I like now, what I'm trying to do into my golf swing now is what Rory talks about, which is externally rotating the knee, which is he starts his downswing by feeling his knee both go forward and turn. So he kind of rotates it.
You're thinking
out.
knee.
Right now I am, because in the past I've thought hip before, and I've wound up overdriving my hips and having my head fall back.
Yeah, I've read Jack Grout, you know, roll your ankles, and then Hogan, turn the hips. Everyone gives a different thought. All I tell people is it starts at the bottom. Whether you want to think about your ankles or the weight in your feet,
different feeling,
or bumping your knees, or bumping your hip, whatever you want to think about. But the secondary answer to that is if you have to think about it, you're probably in the wrong position, right? If you're wound up properly, it's like a little kid in the schoolyard swinging his arms around him.
Or to give people a little credit, you're wound up properly now, but you're so grooved of not unwinding properly before that you don't have to learn the downswing or the forward swing in reaction to a better backswing than you had.
Yeah, people, you should be working on your starting positions and your balance and your posture. As Brooks Koepka said, PGA, alignment, posture, grip. But you should be working on your posture and your backswings 90% of the time. We own a big golf center here, Jake. We see tens of thousands of people a year. And the amount of players I see rehearsing the downswing, trying to drop the elbow in and force the club in. And
it's staggering, actually.
One of the most important things we can tell people is that if you're in the right position at the top, that just happens naturally. You know, and if you have to force it in your downswing, then you're in the wrong position in your backswing. I tell people this all the time. Look, you're a smart, intelligent human. You want the elbow to drive in and the club to drop a little bit. You're rehearsing it a million times, and yet it won't happen. Something is preventing it from happening. And what's preventing it from happening is you're in the wrong position at the top of your backswing, so you can't do it.
Totally agree.
Stay in posture, stay flexed, wind up with your upper body feel the flex in your back leg. Don't let it escape to the back leg too much. And then use the lower body and the ground to kind of rotate and square up the club. I mean, it's pretty simple. You don't want to over-rotate. You sure don't want to turn everything at once because then you don't wind the spring at all. But you also don't want to try to move too much. I think there's a general sense in people that if they move more, they're working harder and more stuff's happening, so they'll get more speed.
Yeah, it's the opposite.
It's the old, remember Stanley and the Dragons?
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. You watch that VHS tape 8 million times.
I hate to tell you.
Stanley and the Dragons.
I don't remember that Stanley and the Dinosaurs, maybe?
Oh, yeah, not maybe. The Dragons, yeah. I don't remember.
Couldn't remember the kid's name was Stanley. Apparently, I put you through
Stanley
watching
and the
that thing a
Dinosaur.
lot to not remember.
Oh my
it.
God! And remember those the Land Before Time videos?
Well,
you
those
watched
I
at 8
remember.
billion times. But Stanley and the Dinosaurs. Yeah, it was work smarter, not harder. That was the thing, and that's your golf swing. Moving around too much, over rotating your legs, straightening them out, shifting laterally, swaying. You feel like you're doing stuff, but you're just really like the drunk uncle at the wedding, moving stuff all over the place, right? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it's Elaine from Seinfeld.
A lot. It's the thumb dance. A lot of movement does not equal farther ball flight.
No.
I tell people your wind up, if you picture a sheet of saran wrap stretched out on a frame, and as you turn and wind up your upper body and your hips into that back leg, it's like pushing the finger further into that stretched saran wrap. You get more and more pressure. But if you lose the back leg, if you straighten the leg or go to the outside of the foot, it's like poking your finger through. I knew you knew the you knew the finish. You've only heard this 80,000 times in your life, and then you have nothing. The piece of saran wrap just collapses and you have no tension at all, right?
And unfortunately for us, all of us have a different amount of pressure that we can sustain in our saran wrap. And that is where we make the point earlier about we're not trying to shorten your swing. We're trying to get you coiling the right amount for you.
Well, you're better to have 80% of the amount of saran wrap pressure than to lose it all, right?
And I mean, I'm an example of that. I don't rotate 90 degrees every golf swing. I'm about 85, and it's because I found that the way my body is, I'm not flexible enough. I have to work on it. I do not perform as well when I try to overdo it. And so I hit the ball better and farther when I'm more tight and more efficient.
Yeah, well, you're using your muscles, right?
Much better.
You can't use them. I've got to flex. I looked at video the other night, Jake, and my head's coming up a good inch. And that inch would correlate with that thrusting forward a little bit in the backswing, not turning into the hip. I'm really trying to turn into that bum cheek. I'm feeling. It's not a feeling I recommend to people because if you turn into the bum cheek, you might go to the outside of the heel. But teaching the coil for so many years, 30 years now, and I'm almost resist too much, right? I'm like, remember Gary Player, kick your knee at the golf ball and really resist. He was the epitome of turning against the back knee. And I think I've taught that so much, not to that extent, the Gary Player look at all, but that I kind of have stopped my leg. I've almost locked it up. So I've got to feel the weight almost overturning into the bum cheek to really get a proper turn.
That's the only reason why I prickled a little bit when that one line from Hogan. As much as it's a great thought, you can overdo anything, right?
But resisting at the start is okay. You have to build the spring. So if I said to you, again, with like the saran wrap, if I said to you more turn or less turn with the hips at the start, less turn is better. Right? If I said to you more turnover on the backswing or less turn is better. If I said to you, right? So you've got to maintain an ability to move forward.
For sure.
So that's why an 85% swing is better than a 115% swing.
Totally. It's what we've been talking about the last 45 minutes. It's just you can't overdo any one thing, right? Everything is overdoable is the point to be made.
What's your Twitter handle if anyone has any questions on loading and unloading and body coil?
At Jake Haime PGA.
And I'm at Kevin Haime, and we'd encourage people to do that. We went a little deep today.
Well, and I think we touched on pressure, we touched on, lateral movement through the golf ball.
I tried numbers. On biomechanics, obliques.
Yeah. But it's all stuff that we'll dive into in the future, I'm sure, right? They're all fascinating topics in their own right. But if you can just coil simply, you take advantage of all these amazing things without even having to think about it too much, and you produce a more powerful, regular golf swing.
No question. I'm just reading that so you don't really have a six-pack. I'm looking at this biomechanics of this guy here, his abdominal wall.
Well, I don't have a six-pack for other reasons, but I know what you meant.
He's got 5 on each side, and the third from the top is called the rectus abdominis muscle. And then the tendinous inscription is the tendon in between them. I should be reading all this.
Yeah, I feel like we should.
I think it would bring it a little too deep. That would bring it a little too deep to the teaching tee with my beginner ladies. But I think turning those muscles against each other, something. Jake, just to finish, I have honestly 30 years of teaching. I really believe this is the secret to making people get out of that 75% of you slicing and women can't hit it out of their shadow thing, you know?
Yeah.
If you can get your body to work properly. I have gained pupils, male and female, 25 yards in an hour. Now, listen, I am not a one-lesson guy. I think it's a terrible thing to do. You've got to work at golf over time and develop it, and you've got to get with a coach and spend time with him or her. But if you can get people to feel the coil, the load, and they've never done it because they've never been taught it, I've gained people 25 yards in 1 hour. Easily. And sometimes more than that.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's an amazingly important thing to learn to wind and unwind your body properly. My favorite books, just in finishing, Practical Golf, John Jacobs. Some of it's hidden in 5 Lessons by Hogan, but he doesn't spend a ton of time on it. The Golf Swing by David Ledbetter, the pivot stuff is important. One of my favorite books is 5 Lessons by Steve Elkington. He says his back knee doesn't move a single inch during his backswing. So he doesn't like to move the back knee a single inch. He had one of the great swings of the 90s. Nick Bradley talks about pivot properly. Jimmy McLean. There are many books that do it. But
we should do a golf swing book club episode at one point.
Yeah, well, right before Christmas.
Good
we'll recommend
project.
some in our December podcast where we'll recommend great books. I just recommended a bunch, though, so there you go. Mm-hmm. Thanks for listening, everybody. At Kevin Haime again or at JKPGA if you have any questions. We'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks.